When I was born, my father was very happy. He had long dreamed of having a son, but I didn't have any brothers or sisters afterward. God didn't give us any. So I grew up as an only child. But don't think that my parents spoiled me, as sometimes happens when there's only one child in the family. I was never pampered or spoiled. I started going into the Taiga in childhood, instead of kindergarten. By the age of 8, my father had already taught me to walk on homemade short hunting skis. He didn't approve of store-bought ones because they were long, inconvenient in the Taiga, fragile and expensive. He taught me how to find my way by the stars without a compass or maps. Once, pointing at the sky densely studded with stars, he showed me the Big Dipper and asked me to pay attention to the North Star, which shone brighter than all the others. He said that this star would always guide a lost person home. In general, my father always gave very sensible and practical advice. He used to tell me, when you enter the Taiga, note where the sun is, so that when you leave, it will be on the other side. If you think you are lost, don't panic. Sit on a stump, rest, have a smoke, calm down, and only then make a decision. Don't fear animals. Fear people. They can be 100 times worse. Father also said that tiger hunters have their own map in their heads, and they follow it without losing their way, somehow sensing danger. He taught me to recognize various bird and animal tracks, gradually introducing me to tiger life. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps and continue his work. He said hunting is not a bad profession for a man, even though it's a hard life. He also explained to me that when hunting a squirrel or a cunning sable, you need to circle the tree so that only the animal's snout peeks out from behind the trunk. Aim at the nose, and the shot will find its target, preferably in the eye. This way, the pelt will remain intact and won't get damaged, meaning it will sell for a higher price. At 12 years old, I was already a sharpshooter with a rifle, first with a small caliber one, and then my father entrusted me with a Badanka rifle, with which I went after big game and even bears. He taught me to make marks on trees, remember animal trails, fear nothing in the Taiga, taught me that the Taiga is our provider and must be respected like our dear mother. The Taiga, my father said, doesn't like weaklings, scoundrels, or cowards, nor does it like misers and greedy people. Yes, I later understood. In the Taiga, you can meet any type of character, the most diverse men, from saints to utter devils, and a person reveals themselves completely here. They can't hide their black, nasty nature for long. From childhood, I learned to treat the Taiga and fire with care, having seen how terrible Taiga fires are. How tough and harsh and sometimes very dangerous the life of a Taiga hunter is, who is rarely at home to provide for himself and his family. If he's lucky enough to have one, of course. One winter, my mother passed away. She died of appendicitis. We didn't get her to the hospital in time. I was 17, and my father decided to take me on what he called his last bear hunt. A rogue bear had appeared nearby, causing a lot of trouble for people. And generally a bear that hadn't gone into hibernation, being hungry and therefore angry, was very dangerous for hunters. My father had previously hunted potapich, which means the master, as this hungry and angry bears are called here since time immemorial. People said my father was a great shooter, taking down a bear with a single shot. He was nicknamed Prokop, which means bear hunter. But as they say, old age is no joy. His eyes were no longer as sharp, his hand not as steady, and his strength was not what it used to be. But for me, it was all new. It was my first time. Still just a boy, going after a bear like a grown man. I thought this would be something to tell my friends and the girls later, to entertain them at the dances in our club, or Palace of Culture, as we jokingly called it. Early in the morning, before the sun had even risen, and the crust was frozen and therefore firm, we strapped on our homemade skis and set off. We took Zhuchka, our like a dog, with us too. She always went hunting with my dad and loved it. He never went into the Taiga without dogs, often taking 2 for reliability. And the Taiga in winter is unbelievably beautiful. It stands like a wall, all covered in snow, cedars, pines, and firs, like fairy tale queens, in white coats and hats. No matter how many times I've seen it, the beauty of the forest never gets old. I walk, marveling at it, not feeling the cold. Shuchka is happy too, diving into the snowdrifts like a black spot and barking joyfully at the crows and jackdaws. And they, frightened by her, drop frozen cones on us from the tall cedars as they fly away. Father kept grumbling at me not to catch crows, meaning not to dawdle, but to stay alert. He said that jokes are bad with a wandering bear, and it was precisely him we were looking for. Father had come across him recently while hunting squirrels and sables. This Potapiksh, for some reason, hadn't gone into hibernation, as all his furry kin do in autumn. Either he hadn't accumulated enough fat for the winter, perhaps because of the recent fires that had driven him from his native lands, or someone accidentally woke him up while wandering through the taiga. Father walked ahead, looking forward, and I followed right in his tracks. But I still managed to admire the taiga's beauty, no matter how much Father scolded me. He couldn't understand why I admired it if I had seen it all so many times. He himself had traversed almost all of it back and forth, blazing many trails laying routes, and knew everything for 1,000 kilometers around, and nothing could surprise him here anymore. This is no time for that. A wandering bear is especially dangerous, being hungry and ferocious, he said. So, keep your eyes wide open, son, Father repeated, walking confidently through the taiga. It was as if he was walking down a country road, not trudging through snowy forest thickets and drifts. And then the lazy winter sun seemed to feel ashamed for oversleeping and hurriedly began to rise over the taiga. At first, it made a feeble attempt to peek out from behind the horizon, but then it shone brighter, finally waking up, blushing with dawn. I followed my father along the path he had laid, sparkling in the rays of the waking sun like tiny colorful diamonds blinding my eyes. I breathed in the healthy taiga air, filling my lungs with it. It was great. It was nearing lunchtime when we, tired and cold, approached an old hunting winter hut, which had been settled by my grandfather. This small, plain hut made of thick and sturdy larch logs. It's quite small, about 5 or 6 steps wide, and the same in length. It looks out at the world through 2 small, nearly blind windows on adjacent walls. My father told me that the windows were made this way on purpose, to prevent large animals, especially troublesome bears, from breaking in. The door was added later, strong, made of oak, on powerful wrought hinges, with heavy bolts inside and out, to protect against those troublesome bears. But it's never locked from the outside. That's not the custom here. Besides, who would you lock it against out here in the taiga? And if someone really wants to get in, they'll break the lock anyway, right? Of course, a roof over your head, sturdy walls, and a hot stove mean a lot to taiga hunters who spend half their lives in the forest. And I think many people have probably been saved in this hut during rain, blizzards, and winter cold, grateful to whoever built and equipped it, not letting others like themselves, taiga hunters, freeze to death. Maybe this old hut even saw runaway convicts and prisoners. There were always plenty of them roaming our area since the Tsarist times. Many perished here, many settled in our area. Zhuchka, though also tired, briskly ran around the hut, barked proprietarily in all 4 directions, and darted inside. Father had been here in the fall. As is customary among hunters, he replenished the food supplies in metal boxes and a barrel to keep it away from uninvited animals, especially bears. He added more flour, grains, salt, and matches stocked up on firewood, dry pine needles, and birch bark, so the stove could be lit without any paper, and fetched water from the stream into a large can and a flask. Everything was in place, meaning no one had been here before us. Bundles of St. John's wort, mint, thyme, and other herbs hung on the walls, good for both treatment and making fragrant medicinal tea, warming in autumn rain and winter cold. In general, this and other huts always stored essential supplies: firewood, matches, salt, sometimes even sugar, grains, and rusks, and by the unwritten law of mutual aid. Any hunter or even a random traveler could warm up, spend the night, and even use the food supplies, but always leaving some for the others that may come after. Such are the unwritten but strict laws of the taiga from time immemorial. Soon in the tiny stone stove, larch and birch logs were merrily crackling, and in a small sooty pot, a special tasty hunter's stew was bubbling. Having eaten and drunk fragrant and tasty tea made from rose hips, St. John's wort, and mint, brought from home and fed Zhuchka, my father and I stretched out on the bunks, laying soft larch branches instead of a mattress and covering ourselves with an old flannel blanket brought here by my father. Gradually, the chilly hut warmed up, but we squinted and cried from the acrid smoke that filled the entire room. Zhuchka also squinted and cried with us. I wanted to open the door to let the smoke out, but my father didn't let me. "No need to let the heat out," he said. "We won't warm the hut that way. The smoke will rise to the ceiling. We won't suffocate, don't worry." After lunch, we didn't lounge for long. We went to look for that wandering bear. But the day was fruitless. Our cunning bear, it seemed, had moved deeper into the taiga, or to some village where predators can always find something to scavenge. It gets dark early in winter, so we hurried back to the hut before nightfall. There's nothing to do in the taiga at night. Darkness lazily crept into the small windows, and we lit the kerosene lamp. Father threw an armful of wood into the stove, and the fire started crackling merrily again, dancing and dispelling the darkness and cold. There wasn't as much smoke now. The air began to warm up, and it became warm and cozy in the hut. Father cooked porridge with dried and smoked boar meat. Father also made me some of his fragrant tea from dried berries, which was extraordinarily delicious with rye crackers. After dinner, we lay down on our soft pine bed. Zhuchka, having run through the taiga all day and quite tired, lay down too, only weakly reacting to the sounds and rustles around us, indicating the awakening of the taiga's nocturnal life. Soon, warmed by the heat and hearty food, she began to doze off, occasionally nodding her head to the floor with her sharp nose. But it was too early to sleep, and I asked my father to tell me something from his hunting life. How many different taiga stories he knew. Some he got from his father and grandfather, who were excellent storytellers, and some he made up himself. They all had plenty of imagination. He often made us laugh with his tales or scared us with horror stories about tigers and bears and the forest spirit. My grandfather, I remember, loved to scare the village kids with his stories about the tricks of the forest monster. "He's the master here. He'll do whatever he wants in his forest," the old tiger man would say. But he never did anything bad to the baptized. That's why many Tungus, Evenks, and Nanai people adopted our Christian faith, to appease the old forest spirit. So my father began to tell his tale about the forest spirit, how he sends hurricanes in winter and clears paths through the forest, as if someone had laid a wide road there. One time my father said he himself was walking along such a path in winter and saw the forest spirit with his own eyes bending a rowan tree, eating the frozen berries straight from it. Hairy, small, and scary looking. Then he glanced at my father with his big eyes and disappeared into the forest. And that was the last anyone saw of him. Of course, I didn't really believe my father's story. I wasn't a child anymore to believe in fairy tales. And suddenly, outside the hut, I heard the creaking of snow, as if someone very large was walking back and forth. Then quiet. Indistinct conversation started coming from somewhere in the taiga. Zhuchka, as if jolted awake, was the first to get worried. She sniffed the air with her sharp nose and growled discontentedly. "Father, do you hear?" I whispered. "It sounds like voices." "Be quiet." "Hush," he whispered back. We sat and listened. Zhuchka was now really alarmed. She bristled, growled, and cautiously approached the door, though clearly afraid of something. Someone was standing outside the door, fumbling around, trying to open it. Father took his gun, quietly tiptoed to the door, and listened. "Who's there?" he asked. Something suddenly groaned and howled. And then the door burst open. I screamed in surprise and fear. Something faceless and bodiless, all in white, rushed into our hut, bringing with it a blast of icy cold and snow that blinded us, and it howled like a night bird. "Be gone, unclean spirit," my father shouted, crossing himself 3 times, and then fired his rifle into the night. Everything suddenly went quiet. I stood next to my father, frozen in place, my teeth chattering. Zhuchka, usually so brave, was clinging to my legs and whimpering fearfully. Inside the cabin, it was nearly dark. My father, with trembling hands, struck a match and lit the lamp. Everything, the floor, our bed, and we ourselves, was covered in snow. But the door, it was tightly shut, bolted from the inside. My father crossed himself 3 times, smiled, and said, "See, son, how the evil spirits fear our cross. That's how we protect ourselves. And also with this," he pointed to the shotgun. We looked and saw a hole in the door, made by my father's bullet, intended for the wandering bear. "Must have been a storm in the forest that opened the door with the wind," I said to my father. "A storm? You have a lot to learn. Let's go see what's out there." And my father bravely stepped outside. I followed, though I didn't really want to go into the scary, cold darkness. Zhuchka followed us too. The almost full moon hung like a huge orb above the Taiga, illuminating everything with a hazy yellow light. Calmly and majestically burning like a precious yellow gem was the bright star of the Virgo constellation. The trees stood still. It was frosty. The snow on the clearing in front of the cabin shimmered, not in the sunlight but in the moonlight, with billions of tiny colorful diamonds. Nothing and no one disturbed the silence. My father squinted and said, "Let's get back inside." We went back into the cabin, bolting the door again. My father threw a few more logs into the stove, and the room lit up with the cheerful light of the roaring fire. I shook the snow off the bed and swept it out of the cabin. We started to settle down to sleep again. The fear had passed. It's all because I forgot to bless our door, as my grandfather and father taught me. Only they called it oxtit, the old way, my father suddenly said. He ceremoniously blessed the door and the vent. It was amusing to watch him. He then began muttering some secret words known only to him. And he spat over his left shoulder. He looked so funny. Just like an old Taiga shaman. There used to be one living near us. A bear later tore him apart. It was already deep midnight. Silence outside. My father fell asleep first and soon began snoring loudly, as if nothing had happened. I had nightmares all night. I met that forest spirit in the woods and fought a huge bear, probably screaming loudly, disturbing Zhuchka, who was curled up next to me. That's the kind of story that happened to us in the old cabin. To this day, I can't understand what that was. The door was bolted from the inside. It was some kind of supernatural nonsense. Oh, and that cunning bear, the wanderer, my father and I, along with another hunter, eventually tracked and killed it so it wouldn't cause trouble, wandering around the forest and Taiga villages, scaring the honest folk. That was my first baptism by fire, as my father used to say. Soon I grew up and started hunting fur-bearing animals for money and big game for meat, just like the adult hunters. And I always remembered my father's advice. Never forget to bless your temporary Taiga shelter, to keep away from sin and all evil spirits. I don't know about you, but I somehow started believing in supernatural forces. They exist, just like the various spirits and evil entities of the Taiga.